And let's get started. For those of you who have joined us, thank you very much. I'm Doug Davenport with Prospect Silicon Valley. We're going to be giving this presentation about the influences and battle lines, as we're calling it, with regards to decarbonization. First, before I get started, just want to acknowledge and thank AIA San Francisco Committee on the Environment, and Charlie Stott and Mark Kelly. Mark should be joining us shortly. Bar Architects, Ideas Consulting, UL Solutions, and Alter Engineers. This has been a great partnership in putting this presentation together. And as you'll hear, we hope this is the first, and several conversations will be happening. Let's go ahead and move forward. We can go next slide. There you go. So, back one. Thank you. For those of you in AIA, this webinar is eligible for CEU credits. We posted the learning objectives here about exploring decarbonization drivers, understanding the impact that initial design choices have in the process, understanding some of the discussion points and kind of practical advice on discussing these points with your clients, and learn ways that firms can become leaders. Q, I'll just mention if you've seen that Mark needs to be led into this side of the presentation. Thank you very much. We can move forward. So speaking and part of this conversation today, sorry, we seem to be skipping two. Thank you. Speaking in part of this presentation today are some really great folks. Shannon and Stefan and Mark and Brad and Gabriela are all going to introduce themselves as we kind of go through this presentation. But again, we're just incredibly grateful for the professionals that are part of this discussion. So in this series called Talking Decarbonization, this is the first conversation we're having. Our goals here are to enable you to better communicate about the opportunities and challenges around carbon-free buildings. We want to equip you with some knowledge and some resources that you need in order to field the kind of questions and discussions that you're going to be having in this space, and also provide with you an understanding of the strategy, priorities, and process that may be involved in taking on a decarbonization initiative. And Q, I'll just mention again, Mark's trying to be led in as a panelist, if you can get on that. Thank you very much. We just encourage you here, if you've got a quick second to grab a QR code, this is a link to Prospect Silicon Valley's Pathways program. This and other conversations are announced there, and other information about important decarbonization projects. So we really encourage you to stay in touch and stay connected with us as we roll out additional announcements about this series. And we can go on. So let's talk a little bit about some of the influences and trends that we believe are really important to this picture. I'm going to start by talking about a little bit about building performance standards, and then I'm going to be handing it over to our friends at UL Solutions to talk about some additional standards and codes that are coming that are really important to address. So in the state of California, we're soon to start to see both state and jurisdictional building performance standards. These will certainly be a major driver for retrofit activity moving forward, because this will be how buildings are operated in the future. And as you're probably very well aware, California Title 24 now has embodied carbon standards, and we're going to be discussing those a little bit later today. So these are already things that are going to be hitting our projects in the very near future. Let's go to the next one. So building performance standards. Now, if we were all in a room, I could have you raise your hands and tell me if you know what building performance standards are, and we can have fun. But we're all doing this by Zoom. So let me just show you a graph. We're talking about standards on how buildings are operated after they are designed and built. And on an ongoing basis, the efficiency in which a building is operated is going to be more and more tightly regulated. So these are ways to drive overall energy performance or carbon performance in buildings. It's certainly a very complex issue, as we'll talk about. But there's a set of targets that are initially established, and those are then wound down over a period of time, while simultaneously we're including more and more buildings of various types and sizes. So that's what a building performance standard is, and this is probably the only thing that BPS have in common with each other, is that they are kind of a standard that begins to tighten over time. So let's talk about a little bit what we see overall. So across the country, there's a lot of BPS coming into play. So this map, and here's another QR code if you want to grab it, but energycodes.gov should still have this map. This covers where BPS are being either considered, being currently put into play, or have now been in operation. I'll just shift you over to the left-hand side of this map. You may have heard of Local Law 97 in New York or others, but on the left-hand side of this map, California's BPS are really all emerging. The only one that's in place today is Little Chula Vista down by San Diego. But we're going to be seeing them in the Bay Area and in Southern California, as well as likely to be brought into the state building code. We'll go through an example of these so you can see. We just wanted to show you this is a national picture, not just happening across the state. But just as an example, Washington. Now, I won't get too deeply into the details, but this tells you a lot about what BPS are about. It's already been adopted. It's in place for the state of Washington. They first phased in the largest buildings and work them according to a specific standard. As they move forward, they'll be bringing in tranches smaller and smaller and more buildings into this picture with even tighter performance standards in each one of those tranches. What's really interesting here in Washington, and what will be interesting in California, is that the local jurisdiction, Seattle, has a building performance standard based on carbon intensity, whereas the state of Washington has an energy use intensity metric. So both standards have to be met in some jurisdictions because of this. So that's an example of what's coming. Let's move to the next one. And I think we're going to be turning it over to the team at UL Solutions to talk a little bit more about other standards.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. This is Brad Miller, Senior Account Executive for UL Solutions. And if you're wondering who UL Solutions is, many of you have to deal as designers or installers, contractors with the UL standards. Underwriters Laboratories, 130-year-old company that's now publicly traded and got rebranded as UL Solutions. So thank you. Go ahead and move the slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, the mandatory carbon reduction regulation within CALGreen, that's tied into Title 24. And again, there's a number of details on this slide, and I'll just try to get to the point of where, what's important for you in your industry on this. And the thing is, the implementation right now is phased. It started with non-residential at 100,000 square foot, went back to July 24th in the mid-year cycle of the code when they put this amendment in there. And you can see DGS was tied into that. Excuse me. And non-residential is not been adopted, or it's not in effect until January of 2026. So the compliance pathways that you have are within Section 5409 and the life cycle assessment, and you can find it in the AIA. AIA has that section if you ever need to put this into your plan sets. It's up there in their typical AIA information that they have. The first thing is you can go with building reuse. And of course, we want to try to do as much adaptive reuse or repositioning of buildings And, if you maintain your 45% of that structure and enclosure, that'll get you through one of the compliance pathways. The other thing is performance pathways, doing a whole building life cycle assessment, showing that you can get 10% reduction in your GWP. And just to give you some ideas of these acronyms, GWP means global warming potential. And then the other acronym is EPD, which is Environmental Product Declaration. And so you have the performance path, which is using a modeling system. There is some simulation systems. I'm sure many on this that are attending this are already aware of this LCA analysis. Some come from one-click LCA and others that have this ability to model the whole building LCA. And then you also have a prescriptive path, which, for new buildings, this might be the best thing that you can use, is to be able to find that global warming potential within your type 3 EPDs and environmental product declaration. And I won't get into the difference between the types, but one of the things too is that this is the mandatory CALGreen requirements. There's also the voluntary, which is tier 1, tier 2 in some jurisdictions. They're going to encourage, more obviously low carbon use and materials that have lower global warming potentials. Now, this is all good and everything right now. However, I do want to mention that some of you may be aware that there's an Assembly Bill 306 that was authored by a freshman Burbank lawmaker that wants to put all the new code changes on ice to at least 2031. I just want to make everybody aware. I'm sure most of you are aware that there's something out there. It looks like it's got a lot of support. It's been driven by the Southern California fires and the building codes and all that sort of stuff. And so what's happening is any changes that are coming up in the 2025 code that's starting January 1st, 2026, it's going to be retroactive to this. If this does pass and become law, all of a sudden the 2025 code is not in effect January 1st, 2026, just be aware. So I thought I'd bring that up. It's worth a lot of discussion and questions. It's kind of unknown what's going to happen right now. So the other thing that's a big deal in California right now is California is leading the way, for these climate disclosure rules that, have been discussed a lot through environmental, social governance, and sustainability plans and reports. Now that the Securities Exchange Commission program is, any sort of future regulatory is gone right now. It's up to SB 219 to lead the way. And SB 19 was amending existing bills of SB 253 and 261. And the reason SB 219 was developed is to give CARB, California Air Resources Board, a little bit more time to set the regulations. They have till July 1st to set those regulations. But the two distinctions between SB 253 and SB 261 is one is SB 261 is around looking at, climate related financial risks that you need to disclose. And if there's a business that's doing $500 million and they're working in California, they must report that under SB 261. And then any business that's working in California that's over $1 billion needs to report their greenhouse gas emissions under SB 253. Now, one of the things on top of that is you'll see that is right now, that SB 253 is for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which is indirect and direct emissions. Scope 3 emissions, which is really the difficult thing to determine, the accounting for Scope 3 emissions for most enterprises is going to start in 2027. And what on top of that is all these Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions that need to be reported also have to have a third-party assurance provider. So it's similar to some other programs like CSRD out of the EU right now. So there's already a lot of enterprises that are doing business in California that are already going through this process, and they're trying to prepare for SB 219. So one of the big deals and where it can impact you is you may get questionnaires that come to you from your clients saying, hey, we need to figure out, above and beyond architecture 2030 and those calculations, we need help on things that can impact their scope 3 reporting. So you may get some more push and pull from your clients as the year wears on, as it becomes real reality that this is going to happen. Now, with July 1st, the deadline, a lot is gonna depend on a virtual public workshop that CARB is having next Thursday, the 29th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's a virtual public workshop. You can go up and sign up for it, and works out very well that way. And they're going to talk a lot about this because they really only have 40 days to get this done before the deadline. So that's what I wanted to say. On to Gabby. I'm passing it over to my colleague, Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I'm Gabby de Vasconcellos. I'm the West Coast operations leader here at UL. I have a background in architecture and have been working as a sustainable buildings consultant for the past 15 years. And today I'm going to talk about the new LEED version. And I'm excited to bring the perspective of how we can use this new LEED version to achieve our design goals towards decarbonization. Right, so LEED v5 was released in April of this year, and it really raises the bar for green leadership among architects, engineers, construction teams, developers, and operators. It has been focusing on three main key impact areas: decarbonization, quality of life, and ecological conservation and restoration. And so I think with this session, what we're really trying to come out with is thinking about how this new framework can put us into a position where buildings can be serving for multiple purposes, and what can buildings be doing for people, planet, and performance. So that's the three lenses that LEED v5 is bringing with this new version. Next slide, please. So how does the new version of LEED ties into the San Francisco sustainability goals and the building performance standards, as mentioned before? San Francisco sustainability goals include carbon neutral goals by 2050. The new green building ordinance requires LEED Gold or higher for all new buildings. And it's also moving towards a zero waste construction and operations goals. Similarly, BPS also have goals towards net zero carbon, and LEED v5 really seems to be a framework that integrates with both the San Francisco Climate Action Plan and goes towards near zero carbon for the BPSs. LEED v5 includes criteria that most of you already know, including energy, water, life cycle emission. Now it's a big one, and it aligns with environmental and social equity initiatives. So thinking about the timeline for LEED, so v5 was released now in April, so April 24th was when the reference guide was released, and April 28th was when projects started to be able to register under the new version. In March of 2026, v4 and v4.1 are going to be closing for registration. So anyone that is not anticipating switching to v5 needs to make the decision of registering before March 2026. And then those projects are going to be locked in until 2032 when v4 and v4.1 will sunset. After that, all projects will need to be submitting through v5. Next slide, please. Yeah, so talking about some of the key changes under V5, as I mentioned before. Now the rating system is focused around these 3 impact areas: decarbonization, quality of life, and ecological conservation and restoration. There are more prerequisites than previous versions. A lot of the credits which were optional now are mandatory and are part of prerequisites. So V5 really raises the bar for projects to even be eligible now. Platinum now requires some additional requirements on top of the 80 points. So it also includes decarbonization requirements. So electrification is part of it, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and embodied carbon reduction. So all of those are now part of the platinum eligibility. And then V5 uses the ARC platform, and it really facilitates the integration between the building and overall sustainability reporting. So we see that movement towards a more dynamic way of tracking your embodied carbon, direct and indirect carbon emissions as well through the ARC platform. All right, so just to wrap up, so what are we really designing for? Through the V5 framework, we are thinking about the future, a future that is looking towards a net zero carbon goal, thinking about people more, healthier, safer, more equitable, and improved spaces for quality of life, and thinking about the planet, more energy efficient systems, water reduction, and climate resilience. So, yep. Now passing on to Stefan.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Stefan Gracik, and I'm here representing Ultra Engineers. I'm here with my partner, Principal Shannon and Allison. We both co-founded Ultra Engineers together. And yeah, we're a mechanical, plumbing, and energy modeling firm based in Oakland, California. And I'm going to talk about how we can change our design process to do a better job focusing on carbon. So we're going to start very, very high level, take a step back. So we've been talking about different carbon standards kind of up through this presentation till now, but take a step back and just reminding everybody what the full scale of carbon is. It's a lot bigger than a lot of people think. And really until recently, most focus was kind of on operational carbon. So if we see the circle, operational carbon, the scope of it, while important, is a little bit small compared to kind of all the different pieces of a building that encompass like the total carbon emissions of a building, going all the way from material production, transportation, construction process, maintenance, and then even once the building's complete, the embodied carbon, it's not totally done yet because you still have end-of-life demolition, landfilling, and recycling. So there's a lot of pieces encompassing it. And as we learned from Gabby, and through the past decades of energy codes and standards and LEED, operational carbon has been kind of targeted, even if indirectly until recently. The operational carbon of new buildings has decreased as energy standards have gotten better. But as operational carbon shrinks, kind of the embodied carbon becomes a bigger percentage of total carbon in a building. So it becomes more important, and it means we need to start paying attention to it. And I'm going to discuss why we should be paying even more attention to it. Anyways, yeah, and through like Gabby said, CALGreen, and there's other organizations that are sort of pushing us more towards embodied carbon, like MEP 2040. MEP 2040 is a newer organization brought to us by the Carbon Leadership Forum, and they actually published a guide recently called The Beginner's Guide to MEP Embodied Carbon. So encourage you all to check that out. Anyways, moving on. Yeah, so like I said, construction projects have large implications for embodied and operational carbon. Problem is, in this design process, a lot of times these things are not talked about at all, and when they are talked about, they're not talked about until way too late in the design. So the problem with designing for low embodied carbon especially, and low operational carbon, is that a lot of the decisions that are made early on in the design, conceptual schematic design, will have large impacts on, that building's total carbon output eventually. And the issue is that the later you take to talk about these things, the more decisions are made, the more difficult it becomes to actually, design appropriately for the carbon targets that we want to hit. So what we're telling you is you need to be talking about this earlier, bringing it up to your clients much earlier, talking about it in conceptual schematic design, because not only is that help us make decisions earlier on, but also the ability to analyze the buildings for the carbon emissions is much easier earlier in design. When we're still in conceptual schematic design, things like energy modeling or accounting for embodied carbon, the building's much simpler. There's a lot simpler questions you're trying to answer, whereas in design development and construction documents, your energy models, your BIM models are getting so just full of different things that there's too much noise, and you're trying to focus on too many different things. So it's harder to kind of digest down to the kind of large impactful things that can actually move the needle on your building's carbon output. Next slide, please. Right, so, and just further driving the point home, in concept, we are kind of talking about things like the siting, the orientation, the massing, and the envelope. So massing, envelope, obviously very large implications on embodied carbon. So just like what the type of materials you're using, where those materials are coming from, but they can also have large impacts on operational carbon as well, because this is the envelope is what determines how much energy enters and leaves your building. And we need to be talking about this earlier on. Concept schematic design. Schematic design, we're talking about the envelope more. You see things like HVAC, lighting, load, sleep. This is all things that start to just gum up energy models, whenever you get later on the design. So we're trying to push people we need to talk about carbon earlier. We need to bring on energy modelers. We need to be looking at embodied carbon earlier in the design process. So go to the next slide. We're going to talk about the other time value of carbon. So this is kind of why people are starting to push embodied carbon more versus operational. Like I said, operational has come down over the years through energy codes, standards, et cetera. But embodied carbon has the benefit of actually resulting in savings kind of immediately. If you build a new building, that's a ton of embodied carbon you're dropping into the atmosphere, whereas doing a retrofit, saving on embodied carbon, that's like instant carbon savings compared to a new building. And we're finding that for a typical new construction building, it actually takes 19 years for the amount of operational carbon emitted by that building to equal the embodied carbon. So actually, saving embodied carbon results in instant savings versus a kind of savings of 19 years down the road if you're focusing only on the operational side. And why do we care more about emissions now compared to the future? Well, that's 19 years of the sun shining on the earth, and the greenhouse effect kind of having a cumulative effect of radiation. So 19 years from now, we'll be saying, wow, wish we could have saved this carbon 19 years ago, basically. Some other reasons, the future grid is trending cleaner, more solar, better technologies, and future technologies for operational carbon are also improving. So reusing a building now, focusing on saving embodied carbon, and then 20 years down the road when we have to replace the HVAC system anyway, we'll have better heat pumps, more efficient heat pumps. All reasons why we want to focus on embodied if possible. And we can go to the next slide. But for some projects, the budget is possible to do both. So this is a comparison of the sort of time value, or sort of the carbon over time of three different buildings. One is a standard new construction, the other is ZNE new construction, and the third is a net positive existing building reuse. So the standard new construction has a large embodied carbon footprint when it's first built, and then has a fairly growing and fairly large operational carbon throughout its life cycle. The ZNE new construction, they've used heat pumps, they've used solar, they've gotten a zero net energy building, but they didn't pay attention at all to the embodied carbon. And so when the building is first built, it has even slightly more carbon in it, carbon emissions compared to the standard new construction. And it's only after 20 to 50 years do you actually have much of a reduction compared to the standard new construction. Whereas the third item here is existing building reuse, where they stuck with an existing building. They spent their money retrofitting it, bringing its energy efficiency up, but reusing as much as they can, and then still had budget left over to make decisions to bring in heat pumps, solar panels to get not only net zero but a net positive building. So this building, dramatically less embodied carbon compared to the ZNE new construction, but dramatically less operational carbon than the standard new construction. So they got the best of both worlds in this case. So we're going to talk more about this in future webinars. For now, we're going to transition over to Doug to have a discussion on owner communications.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. Really appreciate that. So you've heard a lot, and we've talked about some standards that are coming to California. We've talked about standards that are here. We've talked about new things that are happening on the standards on the lead front, and a whole lot about strategy, right? So we've put a lot into this, and I'll just mention that we're going to have additional conversations, and we'll be announcing some more deep dive discussions of some of the things that Stefan just presented. But we wanted to talk just a minute about communications. Now, we're not here to tell you how to talk to your clients. We're not here to tell you what to say to your clients, but we just want to kind of make a little point here and offer some encouragement. So Prospect Silicon Valley some years ago did a big project with a very well-respected research organization having to do with new approaches to energy retrofits. And we worked with and interviewed about 40 different organizations that are represented in these graphics here. There were building owners, there were major tenants, there were design firms, and there was some construction companies. And we learned that, one single idea is seen very, very differently by these organizations. And you might completely agree with this. You may be thinking, well, yeah, this is part of our problem. But we do see, and we wanted to just cover this topic of how conversations around decarbonization may need to take different tones depending on who you're talking to. So to the left here, owners and tenants, those are your clients, right? Those are people you need to accept this kind of idea and work with you and move forward. To the right, you have design partners. If you're an architect, this could be mechanical, electrical designers or others. If you're a MEP, this could be your architect. And then the builders, right? And you need them to be comfortable and ready and prepared and equipped to carry this idea forward and be an important and critical role in the success of the project, right? So I haven't told you anything you haven't already known before. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how they might see an issue like this. So owners, risk is this is a rather kind of unilateral statement, but owners are rather risk averse, and they're going to be very concerned with, the risk on the investment that they make, and they want to make sure that the returns that they're looking for are going to be secure, and they want to make sure that decisions they make that are going to have 20 or 30-year implications are the right ones. And so there's a lot of risks that they're going to be considering. Overall project risk, O&M risk, revenue risk, and otherwise. Tenants, and I'm talking about kind of bigger tenants or those that are looking to occupy, a significant part of a building. They're looking for comfort. Obviously, they're going to be thinking about how this kind of concept aligns with their standards or even with their values when it comes to ESG or other concepts like that. And of course, it still needs to fit the budget. And the financial aspect of what you're talking about doesn't stop at the investment discussion. It has to do with how this translates to tenant needs. On the other side, when you're talking to your team members and your project team members, there's going to be concerns about whether taking on a heat pump solution or taking on an advanced technology or taking on other concepts, whether those are going to work. Is it going to work? Is it still going to be around in 10 years? Are there other concerns that we need to be considering? Because we don't want to find ourselves having, specified something that is going to end up not an advantage to the client or have something the client won't like. That obviously spells very bad news. And builders, as you know, tend to really care about project delivery and efficiency, and tend to be the entities that at times will kind of undo a lot of really good ideas that made it all the way to them in the name of value engineering. So everybody has to be on the same page. But one idea, hey, let's take carbon out of this design, has lots of different kind of talking points around it. So here's maybe some thoughts. And I would encourage you, if you have thoughts on this or recommendations or questions, put them in the Q&A and let's chit chat about it. But let's look at the next slide here. So you might be thinking of, a particular design approach, or even just a subset of a design approach. And, to owners, I'm not going to go through all, 12 of these or so, but, owners, you might be wanting to appeal to the fact that this is smart money, and that this actually could have advantages to them on the revenue side. Whereas with tenants, you might accentuate more the cost effectiveness and the inherent or intrinsic kind of sustainability value of your ideas. When it comes to your project partners, you might be trying to appeal to the fact that this actually brings new value and actually is helping raise their reputation for future work. So, again, it's not about having one message. It's about being able to translate that message to the values and the needs, and to bring the information that's required to a lot of different folks as we move forward. And being on the same page with them is incredibly important. We can move to the next slide. And I'm excited to have Mark Kelly, our partner at AIA, as part of this conversation. And take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, well, in summary, I think, everything that everyone who's spoken previously is absolutely true. And what Doug was saying about the way of communicating and the subtlety of communicating between different parties is critical. I'm going to focus a little bit more specifically on speaking to owners. Sort of in summary, the kind of things that we want to keep in mind, and this again will, as we mentioned before, this is intentionally at a higher level, and as we go further into some additional sessions that are coming up in the future, we can go into more detail in each of these, because each of these topics could be a much longer conversation, of course. But most importantly, I would say we want to understand and speak to the client's values and priorities. I mean, that's again, all these things are pretty obvious, but it's never a bad thing to remind ourselves of the, we really need to focus on what they're interested in. And in doing so, we need to use their language in, what's important to them, and how do we speak to them in kind of their language, the language of their values. And that'll avoid kind of them not hearing something, or having, hearing something intended a different way. So getting past mental blocks, if you would. Keeping concepts simple and succinct, and language direct. And I should stop saying anything about that in the spirit of that comment. We want to speak to the priorities of the project and the project type. Every project has a different set of priorities, and as a subset of project sectors or project types, all have different priorities as well. So again, really being focused, really being paying attention to kind of what the project needs, and what the benefits are going to be for the project and the owners, and their occupants. And that's we can get into, as we're speaking to clients, as we're speaking to potential tenants, et cetera, whoever the stakeholders are, we can get into more detail as we get further into the conversation. But initially, in order to make sure everyone's listening and hearing, we want to make sure we're speaking to them about the benefits. Next slide. So within a firm, in order to be able to successfully accomplish what I just talked about in vis-a-vis communication is, I mean, ideally we have leadership from the leadership, we have both advocacy and support on the overall issue of decarbonization. And Obviously, leading by example is the most effective way of doing that. If there's not as much leadership as one might hope, also take advantage of leading from the middle, of taking advantage of people who are enthused, who might be kind of mid-level in their career, mid-level within the firm, and take advantage of the passion that they have in order to start take individual projects and start pushing those forward and create a path to goals that others might be able to follow as they see the successes that are accomplished. Not all of this is going to happen all at once. So you want to be clear about where your efforts are being applied within each project, and you don't need to do everything all at once. It's a changing habits is a long process, and so if once we start changing one thing on one project and it kind of accumulates over multiple projects, then you start to see the positive influence, and people will start coming along to that idea. Being honest with ourselves, celebrating the successes and avoiding what I call the emerald colored glasses. So let's not put too much let's not put any greenwash on it. But success, celebrate the successes that we do realize on each project. And then kind of understanding the motivation of, why we're doing this. And going back to, I think it was one of Gabby's slides, we're doing this for, multiple reasons. It's for health of both people and the planet and the environment, and, for the generations that are going to be following us in the future. Next slide. So one of the key things within a firm, and I'm speaking about this from a firm perspective, obviously, is you want to continue to educate and motivate your staff. We want to, identify key priorities for the firm and for their clients. So, some of the most obvious ones in my mind are low carbon design, high performance, obviously, and then healthy materials. And, if we're hitting those three things at some level, we're going to be making some good accomplishment. We'll be getting some good traction as we move forward on our projects. Starting off by hiring knowledgeable and motivated staff. Some people might be more knowledgeable. That's fantastic. You might also look to take advantage of staff who are more enthusiastic, but maybe don't have the experience, because they're going to be hungry to kind of gain that experience. So they're going to be willing to push forward on that. Encourage your mid-level staff to take leadership on these things and push these things forward, as I talked about earlier, and also to develop expertise in particular topics to move that forward. And then working with knowledgeable consultants to embed these principles into the project at the early stages. I think Stefan's chart showing the kind of the potential impact and the cost, and I would say cost, as well as kind of the difficulty of incorporating something at later stages, is inverse to the process. So if we, starting early, embedding it early, it's going to make it less expensive to implement and easier to maintain with as budget constraints come into play, which they always do. Teaching a standard of care, in my mind, practicing in this manner is just best practices, and it's maintaining a standard of care that within the industry that we need to maintain. And speaking of Doug's points about risk, I mean, we have risks as well, and so we want to maintain that standard of care, both to avoid specifying something that might be on the bleeding edge, but at the same time also making sure that we're actually providing the best possible building for our clients. And then briefly, just kind of looking at case studies, educating ourselves, looking at successful projects, and using those as possible jumping points to move things forward. And importantly is always ask, what do we need more of, and what do we need less of, as we're looking at our projects. So I'll stop at that point. I think we're getting close to time, so pass it back to Doug, I believe.
So we have, I think our last slide just says thank you and has some contact information. So, what I'd like to do, we have one question right now in the Q&A. I'm going to guess we have 10 times as many questions sitting out in the audience, and I would encourage you to either post your question in the chat if you would like to do so, or post it in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we hit the question by an anonymous attendee about the differences between scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And I believe that Mr. Brad was going to take a stab at that. Am I correct?
Yeah, and Gabby's actually responding as well in writing, you might want to say, but just
Excellent.
to give a little bit of idea with scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is direct emissions. So if you have automobiles, something you have operational control over, combustion in your facility, whatever, that's going to be the emissions, carbon dioxide emissions out of that. Also, refrigeration. That's the one thing that a lot of people forget about is their high global warming potential refrigerants that are trying to be phased out over time here in this state. That also has to be included in that scope 1 emission calculation. Scope 2 is indirect, which means you're buying electricity from a utility if you're grid connected, and that's scope 2 for the most part, and some steam as well. People purchase steam. And then scope 3 is everything else. And scope 3 can be something as simple as airplane travel that you have operational control over. But it can also include if you're retail or you're a construction company and your client wants to know, what are my emissions on the construction level? Then you got to go back through like the diagram that we had, A1 to A3, which is the upstream manufacturing, cradle to gate, cradle to grave, all these things you have to look at with scope 3. And that's what makes it very difficult right now, is a lot of corporations are trying to really figure it out and dial it in. Many corporations, their scope 3 emissions are 99% of their total emissions, which includes scope 1 and scope 2. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. And it's certainly on the design and construction industry that we're talking about. It's a big push to try to digitize construction site data gathering and calculations and all that sort of stuff that are around not only the operational emissions during construction, but also like we're talking about embodied carbon and what that is.
Right.
Thanks.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much. That was an excellent overview. Really appreciate that. So there was a second question for Mr. Kelly, an example of a project where you've applied some of your sage advice. Would you like to tell a story? You're an architect, of course.
Sure, Bill. I'll try to keep it brief. I think the one example that comes to mind is relatively recent. It's a large renovation expansion of a winery in Northern California, and we started off with kind of the idea of really trying to, from the design team side, really wanting to advance this and seeing a lot of opportunity to improve the operations of the facility. And initially there was some reticence, and we ended up going through multiple charrettes that were specific, topic focused. And one of the ones that I remember kind of talking about most, and talking to them about was when we were focused on water and looking at the water. And obviously water is a key element within the winemaking process. And we were talking to them about, and I honestly kind of went 80% of the way. And I said, this is what we should set as a goal. And here are the reasons why. And I explained to them the advantages for both their operational savings, from a cost perspective, the ability to reuse some of the water in different areas of their production. And, it was really focused on what this is going to do for them. So it was a specific to them. And I have to say, actually, at the end of not at the end, but as I finished doing making my case for why we should be going 80% of the way. One of the owners or one of the representatives raised their hand and said, why not go all the way? And I have, I'm happy to, I think that, based on the fact that I presented the argument based on the advantages that their business would realize, that they just, they were enthused about it, and they said, let's go, all the way, 100%. Let's try to make this the minimum amount of water that we can possibly use. And, there's obviously more advantages to it. And admittedly, I had kind of hedged my bet a little bit, but in that case, happily was kind of out enthused by the client. And I would say a lot of that was because we were really talking about talking about how it would be an advantage to the business, both, on a daily basis, the operations, but also reputationally as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Stefan and Allison, or Shannon, Allison, sorry. There's a question about embodied carbon of MEP. And I'm wondering if you might have some insights there on solid data. And I believe that she may be speaking about environmental product disclosures and other data like that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's just part of like MEP's 2040. So MEP 2040 is like this kind of large organization, and if you want to join like the organization, basically you're signing a pledge that says on all of your specs that you're submitting for your projects, you're gonna list in the specs like I need the manufacturer to submit an EPD for this item. So that's kind of like the first step. I mean, it's kind of MEP embodied carbon is still early, but first step is just getting kind of manufacturers to understand that we're asking for EPDs and getting them to generate those. But yeah, the MEP 2040, they've generated a whole guide that explains like how to walks through calculations for doing like the takeoffs of piping, ductwork, all that. So you can actually go through and you're calculating basically the amount of material and using the EPD to get the embodied carbon from that. Right, but I think refrigerants are also kind of a big piece of it, which Shannon I think knows more about than me. But yeah, big changes in refrigerants have been happening recently, as well, with the reduction of GWPs being required.
Shannon, would you happen to have a comment on that? And say hi.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm Shannon. I was waiting for a mute because I'm right behind Stefan right now. So yeah, refrigerants they're focusing on GWP, so that's already helpful. And then so your team will be able to get the pounds of refrigerant for the system from the manufacturer. It's a part of the selection program for whatever system they're using. And then I just wanted to add to what Stefan said for the piping and the ductwork. You can export the schedules from Revit. Hopefully the project is in Revit, and that will give you all of your quantities. So as far as your people like time to put into documenting it, it's working its way to be pretty straightforward. And that's pretty much all I have for that update.
Okay, excellent.
Hey, Q and Doug, there's a gentleman named Michael Strogoff that had his hand up for a while. I don't know if Michael, you can take him off of mute. I think he's got a question. He's had it up for a long time. He's there.
Michael, I think if you unmute yourself, you might be able to ask your question.
Oh,
I think we don't have a question.
question answered.
Question answered, hopefully. Well, I think we only have a few minutes. We'll see if there's a last second question, but I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the participants in this discussion. We worked very, very hard for the 55 minutes it took us to have this conversation, and I'm really grateful that we could come together and do this. As I mentioned, this is a series of conversations that we'd like to continue, both with the partnership of AIA and other firms that and other organizations that I cannot yet announce, but we will be having some additional partner organizations and some additional discussions. A counterpart to this conversation will be a presentation we hope to schedule in late June around how do you form a strategy and how do you put that in place with your partners, with your project team, with your client. And we're looking forward to having you all again and talking in more detail about how you take some of these concepts and put them into action. Again, my gratitude to all of you for spending this time with us. My gratitude to my co-presenters for everything you've done today to bring your expertise to this audience. We look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. And I think we all, as panelists, can acknowledge Q, our steadfast coordinator on this. We much appreciate everything you did to help us out. And Adam, thanks for joining and helping put this session on. So thank you both. Have a great day.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.